let's take a quick example. Something we're probably all familiar with. I'm in one right now, actually, and it's a chair. So there's a number of ways to build a chair. At its core, it is just something that someone can sit on. So, you can have a little stool, and it's just like a cube, and a person just kind of sits on it. That's kind of a very simple, low frequency chair, but we can go a little bit more, we can do something a little bit more elaborate. So, the typical chair, right? The typical idea of a chair is an object that actually has a fairly high frequency, right? So what I mean by frequency, there's a number of ways to think about it as you are designing. One of them is simply how many components or stroke or parts something is made out of. So if you look at a chair, you have the four legs, you have the part where, let's just call it the butt part, you have the back part. Actually, I think it's just called the seat. Kind of like butt part better. Anyways, so, that's a fair amount of parts, at least for the average chair, especially compared to, that original chair we had, right? That little stool type thing. Actually, some stools are even, it's kind of like a cylinder. And these are pretty simple, pretty low frequency ways of doing a chair, but they're also kind of boring. I don't want to call them boring. I've seen these done really well, but for our purposes, they're not really going to capture what I'm trying to demonstrate here. So let's look at another type of chair. All right, another frequency. Oop, that was not a very good line. So let's think about, I'm sure you've seen. Ooh, that's a little sharp. Didn't mean to make it so sharp. So I'm sure you've seen these sort of chairs before. Actually, I think this would go back and go a little higher. Alright. It's also a little thin, but it's just a little note saying. Okay, anyways. Sorry. Now I'm derailing here. So, this is a much lower frequency chair than the other one. Because, well, for one thing, it is this one simple continuous sheath, right? So already it's one part. It has this flow to it, which allows it to serve its purpose as a chair. But this object itself is actually a very simple object. Very simple, very low frequency, quick to read, low number of parts. You draw it with low number of strokes. So one way I like to think of it, especially when I'm 3D modeling, especially in CAD, which CAD it really helps if you think about it as drawing software. The same actually goes for software like ZBrush. But it is the idea of the minimum amount of geometry, or, well, in this case, the minimum amount of information you need for an object to come into existence. Not just for the object to come into existence, I would say for the object that you have in mind to come into existence. Because, as we'll see with this chair, there's actually a couple of things that you can do to increase its frequency. And they're all required for it to come into existence, but specifically they're all required so that that particular version of this chair comes into existence. So, with that, let's just make a quick copy of this layer because we're going to need a few. I'm just going to hide this and move. Let's move one. Okay. So, I could have hidden this entire thing, but alright. So, let's change up the frequency of this. So, what happens if let's go with, the classic, just adding striations, right? So if I add striations to it, you realize that all of a sudden there is a lot more parts to this object. All right. I'm not going to count them, but we can. I think it's a safe bet that there are more parts here than there are parts here. And yet, I would argue that this chair is kind of less. It's less exciting almost, or less. It might capture eye less than say this chair. And one of the reasons for it is that despite the fact that this is a much higher frequency with all these little striations here, because they're organized in this just clear, obvious pattern, you know, they're still flowing just like this one. Because of that organization, because of how quickly and easily your brain will sort of figure it out, this actually sort of falls into the background almost, and it has about as much importance as the color of the chair, which granted being very important, it all of a sudden does not take on this sort of physical geometric importance that this chair, that the way this chair is built does. Even though this is, you know, made of more parts, if you were building this in CAD, you know, you're just, I mean, you know, it would be a pretty heavy file. So on and so forth. But what happens if I would do something like this? Let's see. And maybe a few here. So now I've removed parts, and yet I've actually made a more complicated and interesting object. So you notice that I said complicated and interesting. That is because, in fact, they are not synonymous. Often you'll see a little bit of an overlap, but complicated, interesting. You can be interesting without being complicated, and you can be complicated without being interesting. Kind of an important little. This really could be a little bigger. Kind of an important distinction to make. So back to this chair. So what I've done by removing a couple of those striations is I've actually added a frequency here, right? So let's sort of go off to the side and break this down a bit. So we have this one frequency, which is that kind of like S. It's not really an S, it's more of an upside down question mark frequency. And then we have this frequency, right, of the little bars, little striations, right? But we also have the frequency of the striations in the empty space. So let's represent it this way. So striations, empty space. Striations, empty space. Striation, empty space. Striation. And of course within that frequency there is the striations and the empty space, which you could count as two separate frequencies. And representing empty space, let's just use an empty box, I guess. And let's use what we were using earlier to represent the alternating between striations and empty space. You could also consider the striations to be kind of a composite frequency, which would be something and then nothing, something, nothing. When you get down to something like that, usually you'll find that people would just simplify it and say something like striation. But technically, if you really want to be meta about it, it is sort of some frequency. So the stacking of frequencies gives you what I think is the most interesting of the three chair designs. I think this is very appealing. You know what? Maybe going into my personal opinions on chair design is not the best place to go. So I just kind of wanted to share this with you guys. It's something that I used to think about a lot actually. And I haven't really used it in a while, and it's sort of just crept back up recently. And I wanted to share this idea. You know, I feel like it's a pretty fun idea, and other artists have used it to great success. I mean, if you want an example of a master of frequency, um, H.R. Geiger. H.R. Geiger is, I mean, God, what's a good qualification? Okay, you know the expression, someone is the mother of whatever thing. H.R. Geiger is like the mother's mother of frequency. Um, so let's use his most famous example. All right, let's sort of go on a kind of an example tangent. Let's think about the alien. All right. So the alien sort of iconic, like the alien's head. Let's go over the alien's body plan, and not so much body plan. Let's say the frequency on the treatment of the surfaces on in the alien. So the reason why I'm saying surface over pretty much anything else is because H.R. Geiger was an architect, and this actually shows in his design. It shows in the way that he thinks about things. He is really great at controlling where your eye goes and what you pay attention to, how you feel. He is very, I would say, visually tactile, if that makes sense. So let's go into the alien. Oh, you'll understand more once you see it. So first you have, that dome, right? Like that smooth, just dark dome, right? Like, and there's nothing in there. It's perfectly smooth. It's super glossy usually. And then around this dome, sometimes reaching all the way across, is this tube, right? And this tube has this super high frequency, right? And having sort of like, let's say this frame, right, for that dome that is so high frequency, just that contrast and the fact that the dome is so much bigger and just so smooth compared to this, relatively thin, very high frequency tube, but very regular frequency tube, right? Remember on here, even though it's super high frequency, because it's so clearly organized, you can understand it, and your brain sort of dismisses it, even though its effect is still achieved. And well, its desired effect is to make this dome look even more smooth and just eye-popping and alien. And then in between, right? So right after that, you have sort of, let's actually, okay, let's do this. So in between that, you have the rest of the alien. You have the rest of the alien's head, which is made up of just a super noisy, just like you can't really tell what's going on the alien's head. I mean, you can sort of, make out like, some form of anatomy and so on, but you can't really make out, right, what is going on. There's just noise. Oh, it's not just noise, but it's very noisy. And when you have a situation like this, when you have a situation where you just have just a large area of noise, it is very similar to what happens with this, except it's sort of just a different kind of extreme. Because you have this just large area that's noisy, your brain eventually is just like, oh, okay, so this is just a large patch of noise. And it starts kind of treating it the same. It sort of dismisses it as this thing that, like, okay, I understand what's going on here. It's just like, clock, 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 noise, gribble, gribble, gribble. And it creates this effect where, while, your brain will totally distinguish it from an area that is completely empty, it might also dismiss an area that is completely empty. It still knows that this is noisy. This has a texture to it, but it falls into the background, much like how, this would fall into the background. Once your brain understands something, very quickly and easily, it tends to sort of fall into the background. Um, unless there's something, making it pop, right? And in this case, you have all of this making it pop, right? You have the hose, which is right next to it. It frames it. It's loud, noisy, heavy. You have the rest of the body, which is generally very loud, noisy, and heavy. Though there are parts that, so if you think about, kind of running out of space here. So if you think about the alien's arm, right? So you have this noisy part, noisy part comes back. Sometimes it's smooth. I've actually seen alien designs where this is smooth. The same effect is obtained, actually. It just has to be something that your brain will sort of push off to the background. And then you'll see that on the muscles, there's these striations, but they're very, they're more evenly spaced than what I've drawn here. But they're very widely spaced, much more widely than, say, on the head. Not the head, the little rim around the head. And, it's sort of to the same effect, now, much like the head, your eye is drawn to here, but the difference between here and here is much less than the difference between here and here. So if you see the creature as a whole, you're still drawn to this head. Also, sort of one of those, like, let's call it a lizard brain moment. You are more likely to look at a creature's head than most of anything else, because evolutionarily, that's how you know if you're gonna die or not. Sorry, that escalated quickly. It's how you know whether or not it's predatory or not, or if it's prey, or if it means you harm, or if it's another member of your species, or what it wants. Okay. Bottom line, a lot of information is extracted by looking at a creature's head, and it's a very natural response for us to look at the head first. Which is why, a lot of times, if you're designing a character and you start with the head, the rest of the character sort of flows, a little bit more easily a lot of the times. It's because you've established basically who that character is. The rest of your body plan, much like Geiger's creature, right? It just follows what your head has said, So, aside from, this noisy little area, when you get to the jaw of the creature, right? When you get to the creature's jaw, you have that very classic predator jaw, you have those really great smooth metallic teeth. Let's actually make it a slightly different color. You have those great, just smooth metallic teeth, right? And that Adobe bug is back, huh? It's the one where your brush will just randomly lose sensitivity. Man, hasn't that thing been around for like the better part of a decade or something? Anyways, all right, sorry, I'm digressing here. So then you have, like those smooth teeth, and they're not particularly fang-like. They're actually they're really uncomfortably human. I remember that was actually a point they said that they wanted to make. It's like no fangs. And then of course, there's the classic, face hugger mouth that sticks out. That's kind of a cool little extra design feature. But I think, the rest of this design sort of explains and everything else. Because then, so then you have, the rest of the creature's anatomy, right? And, think about the way that, the biceps were treated. Think about the way that their legs were treated. Even the tail is essentially this again, except, so if you think about the alien's tail, do I need this? I don't need this. If you think about the alien's tail, right? It's this, see? It has a smooth dagger at the end. And before you get to the dagger, it's just, spines and sharp things and nargle. Right? And yeah, so that's sort of the end of that. I just wanted to share this quick little bit of just design thinking. Frequency is a very, very powerful and very fun tool when it comes to design, and I've actually been meaning to just get back into it a little bit, you know. Starting with making a few tutorials. So one thing I'm going to ask you guys is if there is anything that you guys would like me to make tutorials on. I know I sort of have disappeared for the last 2 years. My apologies for that. I've been very busy. Sort of had some real life things, a lot of fires to put out over the last 2 years. But I want to spend more time on teaching and bringing information to people. I've spent the better part of the last 2 years working in 3D printing and video games. So if oh yeah, it's a very small head. So if if there's anything you guys would like me to kind of address and teach when it comes to in regards to 3D printing, or my experience in game design, I would love to. My current passion project is that I want to make a Gumroad series of Maui 3D tutorials, and how to use CAD for hard surface tutorials, and also how to use CAD to help make your poly modeling better. Well, not poly modeling, your poly concepting better. But I've been sort of having trouble sort of finding, what are good things to bring up and talk about with people. What are things that people would like to hear? So yeah, let me know. Let me know if you guys like this little format of sort of just a random rapid fire. So take care, guys, and hope to hear from you soon.